My name is Nora Bennett. And 3 hours after we buried my father, my brother Grant threw my suitcase onto the porch and said, "The house is mine now." I was still wearing the black dress from the funeral. The hem was damp from the cemetery grass. My shoes were muddy, and my hands still smelled faintly of the lilies Aunt Ruth had placed on Dad's coffin. I had not even taken off the pearl earrings Dad bought me for my college graduation before Grant started emptying my dresser drawers into an old suitcase like he was cleaning out a storage unit instead of removing his own sister from the home where our father had taken his last breath. "Grant," I said, standing in the hallway beside the framed photo of Dad holding both of us as children. "The will hasn't even been read." He did not look at me. He kept pulling clothes off hangers, folding nothing, caring about nothing. "It doesn't need to be read for me to know what Dad wanted." I stared at him. "Dad wanted you to throw me out before his flowers even wilted." Grant finally turned. He was still in his funeral suit, too. But unlike mine, his looked untouched by grief. Crisp collar, perfect tie, dry eyes. In one hand, he held the spare key, ring Dad used to keep in the kitchen drawer. He spun it around his finger like a prize. "Dad left this place to the child who could handle it." My throat tightened. "You mean the child who visited twice last year?" His jaw hardened. "Don't start. I lived here for 4 years. Because your life fell apart." I almost laughed. It came out like a breath. "No. Because Dad's did." For a second, something flickered in his face, but greed covered it quickly. "You can rewrite history all you want, Nora. It doesn't change reality. I'm the son. The Bennett house stays with the Bennett name." I looked around the hallway, the same hallway where I had helped Dad walk after his hip surgery, the same hallway where I had taped down rugs so he would not fall. The same hallway where I had once slept on the floor outside his room because his breathing sounded wrong and I was afraid to be too far away. Grant had not been there for any of it. But now he stood there like the house had been waiting for him instead of surviving because of me. "You don't even know where Dad kept his medication list," I said quietly. Grant shoved the suitcase toward the front door with his foot. "I don't need a medication list. Dad's gone." The words hit harder than I expected. Dad's gone. Like a problem solved, like a bill closed, like a door finally unlocked. I stepped toward the living room, toward Dad's old cardigan folded over the back of his chair. Grant moved in front of me. "What are you doing, taking Dad's sweater?" "No." I blinked. "Excuse me, nothing leaves this house until the estate is settled." I looked down at the suitcase he had packed with my clothes. Except me, he did not answer. Behind him, I noticed 2 men outside through the front window. One stood beside a white van. The other carried a toolbox. My stomach dropped. "You called a locksmith." Grant's expression did not change. "Just making sure things are secure." Secure from who his eyes met mine. From confusion. That was when I understood. This was not grief making him cruel. This was planning. He had not waited for Dad to be buried because he was overwhelmed. He had waited just long enough to make sure no one could accuse him of starting before the funeral. "Grant," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You cannot legally change the locks before the will is read." He smiled then. Small and ugly. "Watch me." The locksmith knocked once and entered like he had been told the house was empty. I stood in the living room while a stranger removed the lock Dad had opened for me every night when I came home from late pharmacy runs, hospital visits, and grocery trips. Metal clicked. Screws turned. Grant crossed his arms and looked satisfied. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the framed photos off the wall and ask him which one proved he loved Dad more. But I had spent years keeping my voice soft so Dad could sleep. I knew how to be quiet without surrendering. So I walked to the small table beside Dad's chair and picked up 3 things before Grant could stop me: the photo of Dad and me on his 71st birthday, the worn notebook where I kept his appointment schedule, and the blue cardigan that still held the shape of his shoulders. Grant's face tightened. I said nothing, Leaves. I folded the cardigan over my arm. Call the police and explain why you're stealing a sweater from the daughter who washed it. He stepped aside, but his eyes promised punishment. I carried my suitcase to the porch myself. Aunt Ruth's car was parked across the street. She had followed me from the cemetery because she said the house felt too cold for me to enter alone. At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Now I realized she had known my brother better than I had wanted to admit. Grant stood in the doorway as the locksmith tested the new key. Then he held up the ring and said, loud enough for Aunt Ruth to hear, "You should be grateful I'm letting you take the suitcase." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. "The will reading is Friday." He smirked. "Don't embarrass yourself by showing up like you have a claim." I stepped off the porch with Dad's cardigan over my arm and one suitcase behind me. I did not beg. I did not argue. I did not tell Grant that Dad had called his lawyer 2 months before he died. I did not tell him I had driven Dad to that appointment myself. I did not tell him Dad had walked out holding 2 sealed envelopes instead of 1. Grant thought he was throwing me out of his inheritance. He had no idea he had just stepped into Dad's final test. I spent that night in Aunt Ruth's guest room, sitting on the edge of a bed that smelled like lavender detergent, with Dad's cardigan folded across my lap like a body I could no longer protect. My suitcase stood by the door, half open, clothes spilling from it because Grant had packed my life the way he had loved our father carelessly. Only when someone was watching. Aunt Ruth brought me tea. I did not drink. She did not ask why I was silent. She had been at the house enough during Dad's last year to understand that silence, in the Bennett family, was not always weakness. Sometimes it was the only way to keep from wasting truth on people who had already chosen a lie. 4 years earlier, I had moved back into Dad's house with 2 duffel bags and a temporary plan. He had fallen in the kitchen, cracked his hip, and told the hospital nurse he would manage just fine because Thomas Bennett would rather swallow a nail than admit he needed help. Grant came for the first discharge meeting, stayed 27 minutes, checked his watch 6 times, and told me he had an important client dinner. "You're better with this stuff anyway," he said, as if caring for a parent were a hobby I had picked up because I enjoyed pill organizers and insurance forms. So I stayed. At first, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, then 6. Then the stairs became a problem. Then the blood pressure medication changed. Then Dad stopped driving, after he clipped the mailbox and pretended it was the mailbox's fault. My apartment lease ended, and I let it end. I moved into my childhood bedroom, painted pale yellow, when I was 12. And learned the rhythm of a life shrinking around illness and wordy 80. Mornings began with oatmeal, blood pressure, and Dad pretending he had slept well when I had heard him coughing at 3 a.m. Afternoons were pharmacy runs, physical therapy appointments, bill calls, and arguing with insurance representatives who spoke like compassion had never been included in their training. Nights were the hardest. Dad hated needing help to stand. He hated the walker. He hated the shower chair. He hated the way his hands shook when he tried to button his own shirt. "I used to carry both of you under one arm," he told me once, staring at his fingers like they belonged to someone else. I buttoned his cuff and said, "You still scare Grant, if that helps." He laughed so hard he had to sit down. That was what Grant never understood. Caregiving was not one long, sad hallway. It was terrible and tender and boring and sacred all at once. It was learning which mug Dad liked on cold mornings. It was hiding the salt because his doctor said no and pretending not to notice when he found it anyway. It was fixing the porch light because he said the house looked lonely without it. It was sitting beside him during old baseball games. He fell asleep halfway through. It was cleaning. lifting, scheduling, paying, remembering, always remembering. Grant called on Sundays when he remembered. Usually from his car. "How's the old man?" he would ask. Cheerful and distant. Dad always brightened anyway. Sons get credit for echoes that daughters produce with entire bodies. When Grant visited, he brought expensive coffee, stayed an hour, and talked about property values. "This neighborhood is really climbing," he said once. Looking around the living room, like it was already a listing, Dad's face changed. Just slightly. "It's a home." Grant laughed. "A home can still have equity." After he left, Dad sat quiet for a long time. Then he said, "A house remembers who keeps the lights on." I thought he was being sentimental. I said, "Then this house owes me overtime." He smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. "Maybe it does." I did not know then that he had started keeping his own records. I did not know he had noticed every repaired gutter, every bill I covered when his pension ran short, every appointment Grant skipped, every time I said, "It's fine, Dad," when it was not fine at all. I never asked him for the house. I never asked him for repayment. I only wanted him comfortable, safe, and not alone in rooms that had once been full of our mother's music and our childhood noise. But Dad saw more than I gave him credit for. 2 months before he died, he asked me to drive him to Mr. Pierce's office. "Estate housekeeping," he said. I waited in the lobby with an old magazine while Dad met with his lawyer. When he came out, he looked exhausted but calm, holding 2 sealed envelopes against his chest. "Everything's in order now," he told me. "Even Grant?" I asked, trying to joke. Dad looked toward the window. "Especially Grant." I should have asked what he meant. I should have pushed. But Dad was tired. And I was always afraid questions would steal breath. He did not have to spare. So I drove him home, made soup, adjusted his blanket, and forgot about the envelopes until Grant changed the locks. That night at Aunt Ruth's, with Dad's cardigan in my lap and my suitcase by the door, I finally understood something Dad had known before the rest of us. Grant was not waiting to inherit a home. He was waiting for permission to stop pretending he loved one. The next morning, Grant sent me a text before I had even changed out of Aunt Ruth's borrowed pajamas. "Don't make this ugly Friday." Dad wouldn't want that. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because it was so perfectly Grant. He had changed the locks 3 hours after the funeral, thrown my belongings onto the porch, blocked me from taking Dad's sweater, and still somehow believed ugliness would begin only if I objected. Aunt Ruth stood at the stove making eggs. Neither of us wanted. "Is that him?" she asked. I turned the phone toward her. She read it, made a sound in her throat, and cracked an egg harder than necessary. "Your brother has always mistaken being loud for being right." I set the phone face down. "He thinks the will is going to save him." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not." I looked up. Aunt Ruth knew something, or at least suspected something. But she had Dad's talent for making silence feel like a locked drawer. "Did Dad ever talk to you about the house?" I asked. She kept her eyes on the pan. "Your father talked about many things near the end." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It is not." Before I could press her, my phone buzzed again. This time, Grant sent a photo of the front door of Dad's house with a brand new brass lock gleaming where the old scratched one had been dated. "Under it," he wrote, "for everyone's peace of mind." I almost laughed. Peace, in my family, always seemed to require my absence. I typed nothing back. Instead, I opened my notes app and saved the photo. Then I screenshotted the first text too. Not because I had a plan, Exactly. But because 4 years of caregiving had trained me to document everything, doctors forgot. Pharmacies denied calls. Insurance companies misplaced forms. Grant rewrote history. Paper remembered better than people. By noon, my cousin Melissa called to check on me, which meant Grant had already started his campaign. He said, "You're upset." She began carefully. "I am." He said, "You're threatening to fight him over the house." I looked across Aunt Ruth's kitchen at Dad's cardigan folded neatly over a chair. "I'm currently eating toast." Melissa sighed. "Nora, did he mention he changed the locks before the will, reading silence?" He said he had to secure the property. "From me," he said, "you were emotional." There it was again. Emotional. The word families use when they want a woman's facts to sound like weather. I lived there for 4 years. I said, "My mail goes there. My clothes are there. Dad's medical files are there. My work laptop charger is still plugged in beside the kitchen table." Melissa's voice softened. "I didn't know that." No one knows much if they only ask Grant. After we hung up, I sat in Aunt Ruth's kitchen and thought about all the years my brother had been rehearsing this moment, even when Dad was alive. Grant spoke about the house like it was sleeping under Dad, waiting for the proper owner to arrive. At Christmas 2 years earlier, he stood by the fireplace and told his wife, "Vanessa, once Dad downsizes, we could open this wall and make the whole place modern." Dad had been sitting 6 feet away in his recliner, wrapped in a blanket I had warmed in the dryer because his circulation was bad. He heard every word gating my send. "I'm not dead yet," Dad said. Grant laughed like it was a joke. Vanessa smiled into her wine. I watched Dad's hand tighten around the armrest. Later that night, while I washed dishes, Dad shuffled into the kitchen and said, "Your brother sees rooms. You see people." I told him Grant was just being practical. Dad shook his head. "Practical is fixing a leak. What he does is waiting." I had defended Grant then, because defending him was easier than admitting Dad was right. Now, sitting in Aunt Ruth's house with one suitcase and no key, I felt foolish for every excuse I had ever made for him. That afternoon, Grant sent one final message: "You can stay at a motel until you figure your little life out. Don't come back to the house." I read it once, then forwarded it to Mr. Pierce's office with a short note. "Grant changed the locks yesterday and is denying me access before Friday's reading. Please advise." The reply came less than 10 minutes later. Not from a secretary, but from Mr. Harold Pierce himself. "Ms. Bennett, do not return to the property alone. Bring your suitcase and any items removed from the house to the reading. Preserve all messages." Then, after a space, one final sentence: "Your father anticipated the possibility of premature exclusion." I read that line until my hands went cold. Dad had not only known Grant might become cruel, he had prepared for the exact shape of it. Across the kitchen, Aunt Ruth quietly turned off the stove. "What did Harold say?" she asked. I looked at Dad's cardigan, at my suitcase, at the phone full of Grant's confidence. He said, "Dad saw this coming." Aunt Ruth closed her eyes. Not surprised, only sad. That was when my grief changed direction. It was still grief for Dad, sharp and endless. But underneath it came something steadier. Grant thought Friday would be a ceremony where a lawyer handed him a house. He did not know Dad had turned the will reading into a mirror, and my brother had already stepped close enough to see himself. Friday morning came with a gray sky and the kind of cold that slipped under doors. I woke in Aunt Ruth's guest room before sunrise. Not because I had slept enough, but because grief had started keeping office hours. Dad's cardigan was folded on the chair beside the bed. My suitcase stood upright by the door. The same suitcase Grant had shoved across the porch like evidence that I no longer belonged anywhere. I stared at it for a long time before I zipped it closed. Mr. Pierce had told me to bring it. So I did. I packed nothing extra. No dramatic box of memories. No stack of framed photos. Just the things Grant had allowed me to leave with. The things he thought proved how little claim I had a suitcase of wrinkled clothes. Dad's worn appointment notebook. One photograph. And the cardigan I had taken because I refused to let my brother turn grief into inventory. Aunt Ruth drove. She said it was because I looked too tired. But I knew the real reason. She did not want me walking into that office alone. On the way, she kept both hands on the wheel and said very little. Halfway there, she reached into the pocket of her coat and handed me a folded piece of paper. "What is this?" I asked. "A statement." I opened it. In Aunt Ruth's neat handwriting, she had written exactly what she saw the day of the funeral, Grant removing my belongings. The locksmith van. The new lock. Me leaving with one suitcase. At the bottom, she had signed and dated it. My throat tightened. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," she said. Eyes on the road. "I did." Mr. Pierce's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. Above a bakery Dad loved, but pretended not to because he said their cinnamon rolls were financially irresponsible. The memory hit me so suddenly, I almost couldn't step out of the car. For 4 years, my life had been measured by Dad's needs. Pills, meals, appointments, bills, clean sheets, fresh batteries in the TV remote, porch light repaired before winter. Now I was walking into a room where strangers would translate his life into assets, house, accounts, personal property, estate. It felt obscene. Grant was already there when we arrived. Of course he was. He stood near the reception desk in a navy suit, one hand in his pocket, the other turning Dad's old key ring around his finger. Vanessa sat beside him, scrolling on her phone. Wearing black so elegant, it looked chosen for photographs instead of mourning. When Grant saw my suitcase, he smiled. Planning to move into the lawyer's office, Aunt Ruth stepped forward before I could answer. "Careful, Grant. Confidence ages badly when facts enter the room." His smile thinned. "This is a private family matter." "Ruth, then it's strange. You brought your wife and your locksmith." Vanessa looked up sharply. Grant's hand closed around the keys. I said nothing. That seemed to irritate him more than anything else. He wanted tears. Accusation. A scene he could label unstable. I gave him posture. "Mr. Pierce opened his office door at exactly 9. He was tall, silver-haired, and calm, in the way old lawyers are calm when they have seen enough greed to stop being impressed by it. "Nora. Grant. Mrs. Bennett. Ruth." He nodded to each of us. "Please come in." His conference room smelled like leather. Paper. And coffee. A rectangular table sat in the center. On it were 2 sealed envelopes. One thick folder. And a small digital recorder. Grant's eyes went straight to the envelopes. Mine went to the recorder. Dad had hated being recorded. If there was one on the table, it meant something. "Mr. Pierce waited until everyone sat. I placed my suitcase beside my chair. Grant looked at it again and gave a quiet scoff. "Is that really necessary, Mr.?" Pierce answered before I could. "Yes." The room shifted. Just one word. But it landed like a door locking. Grant leaned back. "Fine. Let's get this done." "Mr." Pierce folded his hands. "Before we begin, I need to establish whether anything has changed regarding the residence since Mr. People, Thomas Bennett's death." Grant's expression hardened. "The property has been secured." "By whom?" "By me." Did you change the locks? Grant hesitated for half a second. For safety. Mr. Pierce did not write anything down. He did not need to. Did you remove Nora Bennett from the home? Grant's face flushed. She was emotional. I thought it was better for everyone. Aunt Ruth made a small sound beside me. But I kept my eyes on the table. Mr. Pierce looked at me. Nora. Did you leave? Voluntarily. I touched the handle of the suitcase. No. Grant snapped. That's ridiculous. Mr. Pierce raised one hand. Not loud. Not angry. Just enough to stop him. You will have your opportunity to speak. Then he turned back to the envelopes. Mr. Bennett left instructions for the reading to proceed in order antedagio and line 80. Grant sat forward. Eager again. As if the questions had been a formality and victory was still waiting in paper. Mr. Pierce picked up the first envelope, broke the seal, and removed the will. Grant smiled before a single word was read. I looked at Dad's cardigan folded in my lap and braced myself. Whatever came next. I knew one thing Grant did not. Dad had not left only one envelope behind. Mr. Pierce unfolded the first document with the same care he might have used handling something fragile. Though nothing in his expression suggested surprise, Grant leaned back in his chair, still turning Dad's keys in his palm, already performing ownership before the words could legally reach him. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other and opened a notes app on her phone, as if she were preparing to list what furniture they would keep and what they would sell. I kept both hands on Dad's cardigan. If grief had weight, that sweater held all of mine. Mr. Pierce began with the formal language first. Thomas Edward Bennett. Sound mind. Revoking prior wills. Appointing executor. Instructions regarding debts and expenses. Grant sighed loudly halfway through. Bored by the machinery of death, I watched Mr. Pierce's mouth move and thought of Dad sitting in this very office 2 months earlier. Tired, but stubborn. Holding those 2 envelopes against his chest. Everything's in order now, he had said. Especially Grant. To my daughter, Nora Bennett. Mr. Pierce read. I leave all personal journals, handwritten letters, family photographs in the upstairs hall, my watch, my mother's recipe box, and the contents of the cedar chest in the primary bedroom. Grant gave a small laugh under his breath. Vanessa touched his knee. Not to stop him, but to share the joke. Personal things. Soft things. Daughter things. The kind of inherit. I did not look at him. Dad's watch mattered more to me than Grant's approval ever had. His letters mattered. The recipe box mattered. The cedar chest mattered because it held my mother's quilts. Birthday cards. Old school drawings. And 1,000 tiny pieces of a life Grant only valued when it stood on land. Mr. Pierce continued. To my son, Grant Bennett. I leave my vehicle. Tools. Fishing equipment. And subject to the conditions attached herein. The residence located at 1846 Hawthorne Lane. Grant stopped spinning the keys. His smile widened slowly, like a curtain opening. There it is, he murmured. Aunt Ruth's hand tightened around her purse. My stomach dropped even though part of me had expected it. The house. The hallway. The porch light. The kitchen where Dad and I had eaten soup on bad nights. The bedroom where I had counted his breaths. All of it, on paper, had been named beside Grant. Mr. Pierce did not pause for Grant's celebration. But Grant was no longer listening. I told you, he said, looking straight at me. Dad knew. I said nothing. Silence had become my last clean possession. Mr. Pierce looked over the top of the will. Mr. Bennett. I have not finished. Grant waved a hand. Sure. Sur. Conditions. I understand. Taxes. Probate. Whatever. We'll handle it. No. Mister, Pierce said. Not whatever. The room went still. Grant's smile did not disappear, but it weakened at the edges. Mister. Pierce read again. The residence shall pass to Grant Bennett only if he preserves Nora Bennett's right of access, occupancy, and personal property within the home during the probate period and for a minimum term thereafter. As detailed in the attached conditional memorandum. Vanessa's phone lowered. Grant blinked. What does that mean, mister? Pierce placed the will flat on the table. It means your father did not leave you the house free and clear. He left it to you, under specific obligations. Grant laughed. But the sound came too late. Obligation to Nora, yes. That's ridiculous. Mister. Pierce's voice remained calm. It is written plainly. Grant leaned forward. Dad wouldn't do that. He knew I'd take care of things. Aunt Ruth spoke for the first time. Did you? Grant turned on her. This doesn't involve you. Mister. Pierce lifted one finger. It does today. Then he looked at Grant with the first trace of sharpness I had seen from him. Did you deny Nora access to the residence? Grant's face reddened. I secured my property. It was not yet your property. The will says, subject to conditions. The keys in Grant's hand stopped moving. Mister. Pierce reached for the second envelope but did not open it yet. He let everyone see the writing across the front, in Dad's uneven hand. To be opened if Grant attempts to remove Nora. Change locks. Sell. List. Or claim sole control of the residence before completion of probate. Vanessa whispered. Grant. My brother stared at the envelope like it had spoken. Mister. Pierce set his palm lightly on top of it. Before I proceed, I need a direct answer. Did you change the locks at 1846 Hawthorne Lane? Grant swallowed. For safety. Did you throw Nora Bennett's suitcase onto the porch? She's exaggerating. Aunt Ruth slid her signed statement across the table. I placed my phone beside it. Screen opened to Grant's messages. Then I set Dad's old key next to the phone. This key opened the front door for 26 years. I said quietly. It stopped working the day you buried him. Grant's fingers loosened. Dad's key ring slipped from his hand and hit the table with a dull, final sound. Mister. Pierce broke the seal on the second envelope. Then, he said, we proceed. Mister. Pierce removed the papers from the second envelope slowly. And for the first time since Dad died. Grant stopped acting bored. His hand hovered over the key ring on the table. But he did not pick it up. Vanessa had gone completely still beside him. Her phone dark in her lap. Aunt Ruth sat with her purse clasped in both hands. Eyes fixed on the page as if she already knew Dad's voice was about to enter the room. Mister. Pierce adjusted his glasses. This is a conditional memorandum and personal statement from Thomas Bennett, dated 2 months before his death. Grant leaned forward. A personal statement is not a will. Mister. Pierce did not look up. The memorandum is incorporated by reference into the will you just heard. Grant's mouth closed. Mister. Pierce began reading. Grant. If this envelope is being opened, then you have done what I feared you might do. You have treated my death as permission to take control before the law. And before decency, allowed it. The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. But Dad's words settled over the table with a weight no one could pretend not to feel. My chest tightened so sharply, I had to look down at the cardigan in my lap. I could hear him in every sentence. Tired. Disappointed. Precisi. I have left the residence at Hawthorne Lane to you, only under conditions. Mister. Pierce continued. Those conditions are not symbolic. They are binding instructions attached to the gift. Nora is to retain full access to the home during probate. Her room, personal property, records, and belongings are not to be disturbed. She is to have the right to reside in the home for no less than 5 years, or until she chooses in writing to leave. The house is not to be listed, sold, refinanced, rented, or materially altered without her written consent during that period. Grant's face flushed dark red. 5 years, Mr. Pierce kept reading. You may think this unfair. If so, I remember that Nora gave me 4 years of her life when you gave me weekend visits and opinions about square footage. Vanessa, 4 years of her life when you gave me weekend, looked at Grant. Grant looked away. I pressed my fingers into the cardigan until the wool scratched my skin. I had never told Dad I thought Grant's visits hurt more than his absences. Apparently, I had not needed to. Nora did not ask me for compensation. Mr. Pierce read. She did not ask me for the house. That is part of why I am protecting her in it. She paid bills when pride kept me from admitting I was short. She repaired gutters, replaced the porch light, argued with pharmacies, learned my medications, and slept beside my door when she thought I could not hear her crying. A house remembers who keeps the lights on. So did I. Aunt Ruth wiped her eyes. I could not. If I moved, I thought I might break. Grant pushed back from the table. This is emotional manipulation. Mr. Pierce looked at him over the page. It is your father's signed instruction. He was sick. He was legally competent. She turned him against me. That made me look up. My voice came out quieter than I expected. You did that without my help. Grant's eyes flashed. You always played the martyr. No, I said. I played nurse because you wouldn't. Mr. Pierce raised a hand before Grant could answer. There is more. He returned to the page. If Grant removes Nora from the residence, changes locks, blocks access, discards her belongings, attempts to sell, or claims sole control before probate is complete, then he has failed the condition of the gift. Upon that failure, my interest in the residence shall pass instead to Nora Bennett, subject to standard estate administration. Vanessa whispered. Grant. Grant stared at Mr. Wine. Pierce. No. Mr. Pierce placed the page down. Yes. He can't punish me for protecting my own house. It was never yours long enough for you to protect. The sentence cut cleanly through the room. Grant's hand finally closed around the keyring. But now it did not look like a prize. It looked like something recovered from a crime scene. Mr. Pierce turned to the thick folder on the table. Your father also authorized me to collect records if the second envelope was triggered. Nora forwarded your messages. Ruth has provided a witness statement. The locksmith invoice was obtained this morning because the company confirmed service at Hawthorne Lane on the afternoon of the funeral. Grant's face changed. You called the locksmith I verified facts. That's private. So was changing the locks on a house, still under probate. Vanessa shifted away from him. Just an inch. But everyone saw it. Mr. Pierce continued. Based on the evidence presented, the condition has been breached. I will begin the process of notifying the court and transferring the residence according to Thomas Bennett's instructions. Until then, Grant, you are not to enter, alter, remove property from, or represent yourself as owner of the residence. Grant stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. This is insane. Mr. Pierce did not flinch. Sit down. The same words from the thumbnail. Simple and devastating. Grant looked at him. Then at me. Then at the keys in his own hand. For the first time since Dad died, He was not holding them like an owner. He was holding them like evidence. Grant did not sit down immediately. He stood behind his chair with Dad's keys clenched in his fist. Breathing like the room had insulted him instead of finally telling the truth. Vanessa kept her eyes on the table. Aunt Ruth watched him with the exhausted sadness of someone who had known this version of him was always there, waiting for the right amount of money to bring it out. I sat still with Dad's cardigan in my lap and felt the strangest thing, not victory. Not relief. But a deep ache that my father had understood his son so clearly, he had needed to build a trap out of paper. "You can't just take my inheritance away," Grant said. "Mr." Pierce folded the memorandum and placed it beside the will. "I am not taking anything away. Your father attached conditions to a gift. You breached them. Because I changed a lock, because you removed your sister from her legal residence, denied her access to her belongings, claimed sole control of estate property, and did it before probate began." Grant pointed at me. "She doesn't even own that house, Mr." Pierce's voice sharpened. "Neither do you." That silenced him for half a second, which was the longest Grant had gone without trying to dominate a room since Dad's funeral. Then he turned on me. "You planned this." I looked at him calmly. "I was crying in Aunt Ruth's guest room while you were photographing a new lock." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "You send her a photo," Grant's jaw flexed. He had forgotten. "Apparently. That cruelty becomes evidence when you put it in writing." "Mr." Pierce opened the thick folder and slid a copy of the screenshot across the table. There it was, Dad's front door. New brass lock. Grant's message underneath. "For everyone's peace of mind. Mr." Pierce added Grant's other text beside it. "Don't come back to the house." The words looked smaller on paper, but somehow worse. Without tone. Without his smug face. They became exactly what they were. Instructions of exclusion. "These are admissible," Vanessa asked quietly. Grant glared at her. "Why are you asking that?" She did not answer. "Mr." Pierce did. "They are relevant to the executor's determination and any petition regarding breach of condition." Grant laughed. But it cracked in the middle. "So what now?" "She gets everything. Because she dragged a suitcase into your office. The suitcase matters because it corroborates removal." "Mr." Pierce said. "Ruth's statement matters. The locksmith confirmation matters. Your own messages matter. Nora's expired key matters. Your premature claim of ownership matters." I looked at the suitcase beside my chair. Yesterday, it had felt like humiliation. Today, it sat upright like a witness. Grant saw me looking and scoffed. "You're enjoying this?" "No," I said. "I'm understanding it. Understanding what that dad knew you better than I wanted to." The color drained from his face in a way anger could not fully cover. For one moment, I saw the little boy from the hallway photo. The one who used to race me to Dad's truck and shout that he got the front seat because he was older. Then he was gone. Replaced by the man who had changed locks before the funeral flowers dried. "Mr." Pierce turned another page. "There are additional instructions." Grant's shoulders tensed. "Of course there are. Thomas directed that if the condition is breached, Nora is to be restored immediate access to the residence under supervision. A locksmith will be arranged by my office. Inventory of the home will occur before any party removes property. Grant, you are required to surrender all keys in your possession today." Grant's hand closed tighter. "No, Mr." Pierce did not raise his voice. "You can surrender them voluntarily. Or I can include refusal in the petition." Aunt Ruth leaned toward me and whispered, "Let him choose stupid if he wants." I almost smiled. "Almost." Vanessa touched Grant's arm. "Give him the keys." Grant looked at her like she had betrayed him. You're taking their side. I'm taking the side that doesn't end with a judge asking why you locked your sister out before probate. That was the first sensible thing Vanessa had ever said in my presence. Grant stared at the key ring. Dad's old brass key. The shed key. The garage key. The mailbox key. The new front door key, he had added, like a crown. Slowly. Violently. He dropped them onto the table. The sound was ugly and satisfying. Mr. Pierce picked them up without expression and placed them in a labeled evidence bag. An evidence bag. Grant saw the label and went pale. You're treating me like a criminal. I am treating the keys as part of the estate record. Same thing. Not yet. Mr. Pierce said. That was worse. We sat in silence while he completed a receipt for the surrendered keys. Then he slid a copy to Grant and one to me. My name looked strange next to the words, temporary access restoration. Like the house was not being given to me, so much as returned from an attempted theft. Grant snatched his copy. Dad would be ashamed of you, he said to me. For the first time all morning, the words did not hurt. They sounded desperate, borrowed from a father who had already spoken for himself. I placed my palm on Dad's cardigan. No. Grant. Dad wrote this because he was ashamed of you. His face twisted. Vanessa whispered his name, warning him, but he had no dignity left to protect of it. Enjoy the house, he said. Enjoy being alone in it. I stood then. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough to make him stop speaking down at me from above. I was alone in it for 4 years while you waited for it to become valuable. He had no answer. Mr. Pierce closed the folder. Nora. Ruth. I will meet you at Hawthorne Lane this afternoon with a locksmith and inventory clerk. Grant. You are not to be present unless invited through counsel. Grant laughed once. Empty and furious. You're throwing me out now. I picked up my suitcase handle. No. Dad is. Mr. Pierce arrived at Hawthorne Lane at 2 o'clock that afternoon with a locksmith, an inventory clerk, and the kind of calm that made angry people look even smaller beside him. Aunt Ruth parked behind his car. I sat in her passenger seat for a moment, staring at the house through the windshield. The porch light was still on, even though it was broad daylight. I had replaced that fixture myself after Dad complained that the old one flickered like a haunted motel. Grant had never noticed things like that. He noticed market value, square footage, corner lot, potential. I noticed when the house looked lonely. You ready? Aunt Ruth asked. No, I said. Then I opened the door anyway. Mr. Pierce met me at the walkway. Nora. Before we enter, I need you to understand that today is not about reclaiming emotionally. It is about documenting legally. I nodded. I understand. Do not remove anything, unless instructed. Do not search beyond what we inventory. If anything appears disturbed, tell me before touching it. Okay. The locksmith stepped forward with the evidence bag containing Grant's surrendered keys. It felt strange watching a stranger use the key my brother had added after throwing me out. The new lock clicked open. For a second, nobody moved. Then Mr. Pierce said softly, After you. I stepped inside the house where I had lived for 4 years and felt grief rise so fast it almost bent me in half. Dad's chair was still angled toward the television. His blanket was folded wrong. The curtains were open too wide. The air smelled faintly of dust, lilies, and Grant's cologne, which somehow offended me more than the lock. Aunt Ruth entered behind me and muttered. He couldn't even leave the room breathing the same. The inventory clerk began photographing everything entryway. Living room. Table. Shelves. Stairwell. Mr. Pierce moved through the house with a folder in hand, checking rooms against Dad's estate list. At first, everything seemed intact. Then we reached the kitchen. A stack of boxes sat near the back door. One was labeled Donate. Another was labeled Sell. My name was written across a third in Grant's thick black marker, Nora, remove. My stomach tightened. Mr. Pierce crouched beside the boxes without touching them. Photograph these, he told the clerk. The top box marked Sell was open. Inside were Dad's tools, his old fishing reels, 2 framed family photographs, and my mother's recipe box, the same recipe box Dad had left specifically to me in the will. Aunt Ruth made a sharp sound. That little thief. Mr. Pierce's mouth tightened. Nora. Did you authorize removal of these items? No. Did Grant have permission to sort estate property? No. The clerk took more photos. Flash. 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 Each burst of light felt like the house blinking itself awake. In the hallway, we found Dad's medical files stacked in a trash bag. Not thrown away yet, but ready. My appointment notebook, the one I had taken, was not the only record. Dad had kept copies, 2 discharge instructions, medication changes, receipts from the pharmacy, handwritten notes in his shaky print. Mr. Pierce opened one folder and stopped. He read silently, then looked at me. Your father kept a reimbursement ledger. I frowned. What? He turned the page toward me. There, in Dad's handwriting, were dates and amounts. Gutter repair, Nora paid. Pharmacy copay, Nora paid. Electric bill shortfall, Nora paid. Porch light, Nora paid. Next to several entries. Dad had written one word, repay. My eyes burned. I didn't know he was doing that. Aunt Ruth put a hand over her mouth. Mr. Pierce gently closed the folder. This will be relevant. Upstairs was worse. My childhood bedroom had been opened. My closet doors stood wide. A few of my remaining clothes had been tossed into a laundry basket. On my desk, Grant had left a printed email from a realtor named Karen Holt. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss listing the Hawthorne Lane property once you have authority to proceed. Mr. Pierce took one look and said, photograph that. Then my phone buzzed. Grant. I showed Mr. Pierce before opening it. The message read, enjoy playing victim. You were just doing daughter stuff, and now you're stealing a house. Mr. Pierce's expression went cold. Save that. I did? Then I answered for the first time since he threw me out. One sentence. Then why didn't you do son stuff? He did not reply. Maybe because there was no answer that would not indict him. By the time inventory finished, the house had become less a home than a courtroom with curtains. Every box, every label, every attempted sale, every disturbed file proved Dad had not been paranoid. He had been precise. Grant had not failed one condition by accident. He had sprinted through all of them before the will was even fully read. As we stood by Dad's chair, Mr. Pierce handed me a temporary access document. You may remain here tonight if you choose. My office will file the breach petition Monday morning. I looked around the room. At the wrongly folded blanket. The empty hallway. The porch light still burning outside. I'll stay, I said. Aunt Ruth squeezed my shoulder. After everyone left, I locked the door from the inside. For the first time since Dad died, the house was quiet without feeling stolen. I slept in Dad's house that night with a chair pressed against the bedroom door. Not because Mr. Papley Pierce told me to, but because grief had taught me that people who believed they owned you rarely respected locks. The house made its old sounds around me, pipes ticking, floorboards settling, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. For 4 years, Those sounds had meant Dad was nearby. Now they meant I was alone with everything Grant had tried to take before the ink on the funeral guest book dried. In the morning, I found Dad's reimbursement ledger on the kitchen table where Mr. Pierce had left it in a protective sleeve. I read it with coffee going cold beside me. Every entry felt like Dad reaching backward through time to say, "I saw you. I saw the bill you paid and pretended was nothing. I saw the night you fixed the porch light in the rain. I saw the life you paused so mine could end at home. By Monday morning, Mr. Pierce filed the breach petition. By Monday afternoon." Grant knew. His first email came at 1:12 p.m. "This has gone too far." His second came 11 minutes later. "You are letting a lawyer turn you against your own blood." His third was shorter. Dad was confused. That one made my hands shake. Not from doubt, but from rage. Dad had been weak. Dad had been tired. Dad had needed help walking to the bathroom and sometimes forgot the name of a neighbor's dog. But Dad had not been confused about Grant. That was the clearest thing he had seen. I forwarded every email to Mr. Dazed. Pierce without replying. At 4. A formal notice went to Grant. No entry. No removal of property. No contact with realtors. No representation of ownership. At 5. Grant violated it. I was in the living room sorting Dad's medical files when a car door slammed outside. Through the curtain, I saw Grant storming up the walkway with Vanessa behind him. Pale and furious in a quieter way. He pounded on the door. "Nora. Open up." I did not move. He knocked harder. "This is my father's house." I picked up my phone and called Mr. Pierce. "He's here." Mr. Pierce did not sound surprised. "Do not open the door." "Put me on speaker." I did. Grant shouted again. "You can't hide in there forever." Mr. Pierce's voice came through the phone. Calm and sharp. "Grant, this is Harold Pierce. You have been formally notified not to enter the property." The porch went silent. Then Grant said, "She's inside my inheritance." "No." Mr. Pierce replied, "She is inside a residence you are currently restrained from accessing because you breached the conditions attached to that inheritance." Vanessa said something I could not hear. Grant snapped back. "Stay out of it." Mr. Pierce continued, "If you do not leave the property now, I will advise Nora to call the police and include this incident in tomorrow's filing." Grant's fist hit the door once. Not hard enough to break it. Just hard enough to show he wanted me to know he could. "You always needed Dad to rescue you," he yelled. I looked at the ledger. At the boxes marked sell. At the new lock he had installed too early. Then I said, loudly enough for the phone and the door to hear, "No. Grant, Dad rescued the house from you." There was a long silence. Then Vanessa said, "Get in the car." This time, he listened. The next morning, Mr. Pierce called after the emergency hearing. I stood in Dad's kitchen. One hand on the counter he had leaned against every morning. "The court has granted temporary enforcement of the no-entry order, Addis," he said. "Grant is prohibited from accessing the property or interfering with estate administration." The judge also accepted the second envelope and supporting evidence for review. I closed my eyes. And the house, the transfer process has begun. It will take time. But your father's conditional provision is being enforced. I did not cheer. I did not cry. I only sat down because my knees forgot their job. 3 days later, Grant was required to surrender the garage remote, mailbox key, and every remaining estate document he had taken. He arrived at Mr. Farley, Pierce's office without Vanessa. That told me enough. Mr. Pierce invited me to attend. I almost said no. Then I thought of Grant smirking beside my suitcase and decided some truths deserved witnesses. Grant placed the items on the conference table without looking at me. Mr. Pierce checked each one against the list. You are also required to withdraw any communication with Realtor Karen Holt. Grant's jaw tightened. Already done. In writing, yes. Mr. Pierce slid a final document toward him. Sign acknowledgement that you hold no current authority over Hawthorne Lane. Grant stared at the page like it had insulted his bloodline. You're really taking Dad's house from me, he said, finally looking at me. I met his eyes. No. You lost it when you threw me out of it. His face twisted. But no words came. For once, the room did not belong to his voice. It belonged to the keys. The ledger. The suitcase. The second envelope. And the father, who had known exactly which son would fail a locked door. The final order came 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. On a Thursday morning bright enough to feel almost rude. Mr. Pierce called while I was standing in the kitchen. Washing the mug Dad used every morning, even though I had not been able to drink from it yet. Nora, he said. The court has accepted the breach and approved enforcement of your father's conditional transfer. Hawthorne Lane will pass to you. Subject to the remaining administrative filings. I stood very still. Water running over my hands. So, it's done legally? Yes. Practically. There will be paperwork. But Grant no longer has a claim to the residence. I turned off the faucet. The house was quiet around me. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. Thank you, I said. Your father did the difficult part. Mr. Pierce replied. He told the truth before anyone could bury it with him. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with Dad's reimbursement ledger in front of me. I did not feel triumphant. I thought victory would feel louder. Maybe sweeter. Instead, it felt like standing in a room after a storm and realizing the roof had held. But the trees outside were gone. Grant had lost the house. I had kept it. Dad had protected me. None of that brought him back to the chair by the window. Still, protection mattered, especially when it arrived from someone who had loved you enough to prepare for the cruelty you kept trying to excuse. Grant's reaction came that afternoon through an email copied to Mr. Camerini. Pierce, I hope you enjoy stealing from your own brother. Dad would regret this if he saw what you've become. Mr. Pierce answered before I could even feel tempted. Mr. Bennett. All further communication regarding the estate must go through counsel. Miss Bennett will not engage in private disputes about a court-enforced condition you breached. I read that sentence twice. Then archived Grant's email into a folder named Second Envelope. I did not answer. Silence felt different now. Before, silence had been survival. Now it was ownership. A month later, I returned the house to itself. Not renovated. Not staged. Not stripped into something modern for buyers Grant had imagined before Dad was cold. I put the family photographs back in the upstairs hall. I placed Mom's recipe box in the kitchen cabinet where Dad always said it belonged. I folded his cardigan over the back of his chair. Not because I thought he was coming back, but because grief sometimes needs a place to sit. Aunt Ruth helped me sort the cedar chest. We found birthday cards. Old report cards. My first lost tooth in a tiny envelope. And a Father's Day note from Grant when he was 8 years old. Dad, you are my hero. Aunt Ruth read it and went quiet. People are not born this way, she said. I looked toward the hallway, where the new legal lock shone on the front door. No, but some people choose it long enough that it becomes them. Grant tried once more at Christmas. A card arrived with no return address. But I knew his handwriting. Inside, he had written, "We should not let a house destroy a family." I stood by the trash can for a long time with that card in my hand. Then I wrote one sentence on the back before filing it with the others. The house did not destroy us. It revealed us. I did not invite him over. I did not call. I did not send a holiday peace offering so relatives could feel more comfortable. Dad had given Grant one simple test: do not throw your sister out of the home she kept alive. Grant failed it before the funeral flowers wilted. Some failures do not deserve a family dinner to soften them. In spring, I turned Dad's old downstairs study into a caregiver support room. Nothing grand. A bookshelf. A coffee station. A small table. Folders with local resources, and a soft chair beside the window. Aunt Ruth helped me paint the walls, warm cream. On the door, I hung a small brass plaque, the Thomas Bennett Room. Under it, in smaller letters, I added Dad's words, "A house remembers who keeps the lights on." The first person who came was Mrs. Ellis from 2 streets over, whose husband had dementia and whose children lived 3 states away. She sat in Dad's old study and cried for 10 minutes because someone had finally asked who was taking care of her while she took care of everyone else. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. Grant would have sold the house and called it practical. Dad had made sure it became useful. Sometimes, when I passed the front door at night, I thought about the day Grant stood there with the keys in his hand and told me the house was his. I remembered the suitcase on the porch, the locksmith van, the cold brass lock, the way he smiled because he thought inheritance was just ownership arriving early. He never understood that inheritance is also memory, responsibility, witness, the weight of what you did when no one could force you to be decent. My brother threw me out because he thought being the son meant the house belonged to him. Dad's second envelope proved the house belonged to the person who stayed when staying cost something. Grant dropped the keys in that lawyer's office. I picked up my suitcase, went home, and finally locked the door from the inside. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.